Hi, I'm Dr Kyla, paediatric dietitian, fussy eating specialist and mum of two. I'm the founder of the online mealtimes memberships that help parents just like you experience a confident and guilt-free way of feeding children. I'm also a business owner, a hot cross bun lover, and my superpower is finding things that you cannot live without. In this podcast, I'm talking about feeding your family, along with a random selection of topics that tickle my fancy. Welcome to Mealtimes with Dr Kyla.
Today's guest is my friend and colleague, Mandy Richardson from Raise Toddlers. We met on Instagram, which I want to ask you about, Mandy, if you remember, in the early days of both of our businesses, and we met up for bagels once, and the rest is history. She gets the challenges of toddlerhood particularly, and I still talk to her about my challenges quite regularly. I can easily say that a lot of my confidence in parenting my children comes from her. So I'm delighted to welcome her as the first ever guest to my podcast.
I'm so excited. I really am so honored that you would pick me to be your first guest. I absolutely, obviously love you as a friend and really, really respect the work that you do. So to be able to be in your life is just, a joy.
Oh, you're the best. It's wild, isn't it, to think that you can meet somebody online. Like, I guess this is how we do friendships in the future. Well, currently. Is like you meet people online and you become friends. I met my husband online and we got married. So, why couldn't we find friends on Instagram?
It's amazing, isn't it? And it's so funny because it sort of felt like I was like, hi, I'm Mandy, let's be friends, on inbox. But to be honest, I saw something in, say, the post you did, and I think this is what happens organically. And I was like, I identify with her message. I feel like she gets it. Like we speak the same language. And I think that's what brings that sort of kindred, we're on the same mission together. And I remember at first you being like, are we? Until we met up and started to properly talk,
I was, because I remember when you first messaged me, I thought, because you used to be Ray's early years, and I thought you were like a childcare center at first, like when I had read that, and I was like, oh, hey, I don't know, I'm not going to do a free session for you or something if that's what you're thinking about. And I actually
so funny. Yeah, it's so good, isn't it? The journey of even business and branding and all those sorts of things and how you refine yourselves. And that's exactly right. I think it was quite a few people who did go, oh, is this an early childhood center type thing? So it's really cool to see both, the journeys unfold with how we do business and how we support our sort of specific area, of people that are we're in their corner, we've got their back.
Yeah. And I love being part of that kind of dream team for lots of families that my messages really link into yours. They're like an easy, we speak the same language. I think that's a really great way of kind of talking about it. And when you find people that speak your language, you just want to stay with them, right? You want to.
Well, that's the thing. And I think if for families, they can feel that there's a familiarity there, that sounds like that matches, that's not conflicting. And I think that's the biggest thing when I became a parent is that feeling of things on searching online, things being contradictory.
Yes. Yeah, they need to sleep for this much time, but then they need to be awake, but then you need to do this. And how am I going to do that? And it's wild, isn't it? All right, well, let's talk mealtimes specifically. So I'm going to throw you in at the deep end. I've separated this podcast into 3 parts, an entree, main, and a dessert. So my entree part is I'm really interested to hear about your experiences of mealtimes specifically as a kid. So do you want to kind of tell me what mealtimes were like in your household growing up? Set the scene for me.
Yeah, sure. I loved thinking about this and considering, trying to remember what is it that I remember. We all have stories, but, you sort of try and really cast your mind back and think, oh, if I was this little kid, what was I doing? And I think, to be honest, one of the main things that stands out to me is for our family, food and family and celebrations were always very important. So wherever there was a celebration, there was good quality food. And whenever we gathered, there was food. So food was a really part of us socially, as a family, with extended family as well. But with our day-to-day life as a family, I just remember it being quite casual. It definitely, I don't ever remember being a very formal family where we all sat around with our little, I don't know, really class. I'm not that old, but I never really felt like we were sitting around, had to be really still. I felt like, if anything, our meals were often, just maybe outside. I remember a lot of sort of meals, sort of outdoors, picnic style, maybe on our lap as well. It wasn't always the dining room table. There were times it was the dining room table, but usually it was quite sort of, yeah, like even us kids would maybe be around a smaller table and my parents might have it on their lap. So it was quite a casual sort of way of just eating, especially in the evenings. And I don't really have any memories of necessarily a negative association with meal times. Like I don't remember ever being sort of made to eat my veggies, or if I didn't eat my veggies, I wouldn't get an ice cream. Like it was sort of just, you know, you eat, there was no real, like you have to scrape everything off your plate, which is quite interesting considering I was born at a time when that was quite common, I think.
Yeah.
And I also—
Were you a fussy kid, do you think?
I don't think so. I wasn't. I don't really even remember if any of my siblings were more than another, but I was pretty much remember eating most things. I remember definitely saying, like, I've got this vivid memory of being at a barbecue with family and my dad saying that we're having prawns, and I remember him offering me a prawn, and I remember straight away going, yuck, like, no, that's gross. I don't like prawns. And I do remember him saying, just have a go, and if you don't, you know, if you don't want to finish it, that's fine. And I remember eating the prawn, and since then, and there's a certain type of prawn, it's like basically like a peri-peri chili type Nando's prawns, really, you know. It was like a South African type of recipe that was well known to do your prawns really spicy and then do them on the barbecue. And since then, they are my favorite meal in the world. I say to my dad every birthday I have, or Christmas, if he's got time, I'll say, can you make the prawns? So it's sort of funny that the thing I was like, I absolutely won't try, that was something I started to love, and I love to this day. So there definitely were those times where they would say, have a go, and sort of push us to, like, not push in a bad way, like if you don't, you know, you won't get something, but just also, you know, let us be exposed to different things that we might not have just stuck to the only thing that they knew we'd eat. So I think that adventure is, why don't you just get exposed to it and see if you'll eat it. But I also don't remember ever being really told that's enough. So it's sort of really, like, when I look at the two extremes, I feel like we were somewhere in the middle, pretty casual. Yeah, like I've got fairly good memories about growing up with food, you know.
What do you remember eating regularly for dinner as a kid?
I think our family was sort of not as prescriptive as Mondays, spaghetti bolognese, Tuesdays, which my husband said they had their menu, but we did have meals that were quite recurring. So like I do have memories of, you know, learning to cook spaghetti bolognese with my dad, and I still use that recipe, or like sort of, you know, mash and veggies and a meat, you know. It's always like not really many saucy foods. That's one thing I remember in terms of like curries, and that's something when I met my husband, I was like, oh, I don't really think I've had tiger and curry or anything like that before. So we just didn't really have a lot of rice with saucy sort of chicken and like, you know, spicy type food necessarily. It was usually like your meat, vegetables, and a lot of carbs. Like I actually think probably even meat and carbs were like
the go-tos.
Well, especially like, and a lot of red meat, to be honest, because in South Africa, you basically like at 4 months old, you teeth on biltong. Like it's just something that you're really familiar with. So it was like chops, you know, steak, sausages, like a lot of red meat. So it's, you know, an interesting one, I think.
Are they things you enjoy now?
They are, absolutely. Yeah. Like I love steak, and probably more steak and than like over other, you know, chops or sausages or anything like that. But I would say a family barbecue, you know, with the extended family is like an every second week type things, you know.
Love it. So interesting. And I do think you kind of mentioned that bit about like your parents encouraged you to have a go. And I think that's like a reasonable strategy for kids who are not particularly fussy, right? For kids who do like naturally have quite an adventurous way with food or are not bothered, like actually, like, do you want to have a taste of it is a reasonable thing. And you might have heard, like people listening might have been like, oh, Kyla always says like, don't make them taste it or don't ask them to try it. And often that applies to those kids who actually do find eating more challenging. Do you know, if I asked my 6-year-old to try something now, that would make her even less likely to try it in the future, because she's just that like bit more anxious, bit more reserved around food, like very cautious. She wanted to have the day off school yesterday because they were having a sausage sizzle and she can't stand the smell of sausages. So she was like, no, I can't go to school. So she wouldn't have done well with that. But, you know, there are some kids who do actually do okay with a little prompt.
And you're so right, because I'll talk a little bit about the way our children go with food, and it is so interesting. Same family, same way of presenting food, three different completely ways of engaging with food, and that's really important, I think, because, and it's also interesting because the parent, like, we tune into what our child can be like, but then it's also being really aware that when we know a child may not want to, it's about not forcing, but sometimes we then also don't expose because we feel like that you know, that feedback loop becomes, oh, well, then they would never eat that, so I'll just keep serving the thing they always eat.
Yes.
And that's an interesting one to reflect on and be like, well, is it the chicken or the egg? Like, what's going on here? And how is it that we can at least see what's going on by maybe not offering it, because, you know, and I think it's more gently offering it with those sorts of kids where maybe they just are near that thing, you know.
Yes.
like I don't know if she had a day off school, but I'm sure she didn't. Like,
she didn't. Hell no.
Exposure, you know, like that, even though they didn't touch the sausage or even be near it, they smelled the cooking. So
yeah, definitely counts. Which kind of leads us like nicely into our main dish here. Tell me about your experience of mealtimes as a parent now. So what are mealtimes like in your house with 3 kids?
yeah, I would say it's changed as they've like grown, and also I think becoming more aware of different things myself. I think, you know, as they were younger as well, like I've got 2 in primary school, just for context, and 1 who's still a toddler at home with me, like most days apart from a couple of daycare days. But when I had all the older ones that were younger, and I had like a toddler and a baby, I felt like our meal times looked so different because I wasn't necessarily like working as much as I am now. And so there was a lot more variety and preparation, and I just enjoyed that was part of being home with them. So whereas now I do feel like we've gone into, everyone gets fed, but it is quite simplified, which is good as well, you know. So I'd say ways we connect as a family is, I would say most of our meal times together are actually breakfast. So we do meal times together at night, but maybe not, you know, not as often as we'd have our meal around, say, our dining room table at breakfast and share that meal together. And I would say as a family, nearly all of my children like nearly all of the offerings for breakfast, which I think maybe I enjoy as well, that they'll eat scrambled eggs, they'll eat poached eggs, they'll try, you know, porridge, or we'll have just cereal or pancakes. Like it's actually something, there's not many times they'll be like, oh, not that today, you know, like they sort of,
nobody's whinging at brekkie.
Yeah. So, and then dinners, I'm also not like a huge cooking person. Like I like eating. I way prefer other people prepare food for me. And I must say my husband's actually great in the kitchen. So he will, like, you know, if he's rammed with work, that means dinners look different. So if it's a me in charge dinner, it's definitely like, you know, I'm all for some crumb chicken and some veggies from the freezer and some, you know, like I piece together, you know, some pretty basic stuff for them, which is also on the days I've been working and quite busy. But if we're going to have a meal together as a family, it is probably our favorites would be sort of pastas with like some sort of sauce, whether it be a creamy chicken type pasta or a bolognese type pasta, or really your rice. I love curries now. So like rice and, you know, a mango chicken or a Thai green curry, and then maybe we would go to sort of like a red meat of some sort. My kids aren't huge red meat fans, which is interesting. None of them really are. The middle child maybe a bit more, but maybe chops they will eat, but not hugely happy with steaks, or more so now that they're getting older, but definitely younger. It's a lot of effort for them.
Yeah. How do they go with a curry?
Well, the funny thing is, I would say our favorite family meal at the moment is Thai green curry. So every week they request that. And I was thinking about why. Like, why is that their favorite at the moment? And I actually think it is because it isn't always served as, here's your whole curry bowl. Like it's a deconstructed offering all the time. So there's a bowl of rice, there's the sauce, there's some chicken that you can add to, you know, that isn't all mixed in the sauce, so that they can have just some grilled chicken. Some sour cream, which is always the hit. Like I'm talking like spoonfuls. Some of them I reckon have a papadum and spoonfuls of sour cream on it, and that's it.
Yeah.
Like a sprinkle of rice. But yeah, it's something that and lots of like sort of sliced capsicum. My kids have always in their lunchboxes quite enjoyed like raw veggies, like broccoli, carrots, tomatoes. They just like sort of salady type veggies, and so that's something I'll often offer on the side of a meal that's sort of a curry and a sauce, because they will tend to pick those rather than like when they've been cooked. Like a snow pea cooked to them is like, whoa, like they're really not a fan. It's like slimy.
I think it's a really common childhood thing. Like the crunchy, kind of sweeter veggies raw are often easier for kids than a kind of mushy or saucy.
It's amazing how much that texture does change, and then they've got to figure out what that's like, and whether that, even if the sort of carrots have been cooked that bit too long, then they like really are a round carrot, but that's mushy. Whereas if they're even slightly less, cooked, they sort of like, oh, it's a bit crunchy still, I don't mind it. So it's quite an interesting dynamic. But yeah, it's just, I think it's, we just try to keep, especially on, working and picking kids up from daycare and that end of day run, we know the days where we don't try and make a big deal and stress ourselves out about it. We still do connect together at some, even if me and Kieran aren't necessarily eating with them, we'll sit. And one thing we've always done is sort of like highs and lows, where we just say, what was your high of the day and your low? And it's been hilarious because we've done it probably since the first was maybe 2 and the second born was like 10 months. And then as the second born started to sort of say, my low was this, or my high was that. Obviously she didn't say it like that, but she just would say my low over and over again. And it just became this hilarious joke, like Milo, like tin of Milo. It still sort of happens where we'll be stuck on someone saying Milo, and I'm like, get on with it. Like, what was your low? So that's when they sort of share what was, a part of the day that wasn't that great, a part of the day that was great. And the funniest thing as well is their lows that they share are just so like, I think Farah yesterday said something like, my high, it's always linked. It's like my high was doing ballet, my low was like doing ballet. And we're like, okay.
Cool, so it was good at that.
One part of ballet that was great and one part that wasn't great. But it is funny. I mean, you do a similar thing, right? So you know what I mean, how it's quite sweet.
Ours is our high, or Clee's is, my favorite part of the day is, and then she'll pause, going to Nanny's house. And I'm like, we didn't go to Nanny's house today. She's like, my favorite part of the day is, I'm like, okay, going to Nanny's house, got it.
It's so funny, and they'll repeat that for weeks. Yeah, it's so sweet.
Oh, I love it. That's funny. What time do your kids generally have dinner?
So this is something we've come to an agreement on, because like my hubby grew up in a family where they ate super early, like really like 5. And I would say with our casual family life that we grew up in was more like 7:30, like, I mean, like, shouldn't we be sleeping by then? Like,
what were my parents doing?
Go and do family hangouts with his parents, it's always like 4:35. When we go to do family hangouts with my parents, he's like, I'm starving, and I'm like, I'm sure we'll start the barbecue soon. It's like 7:30. So it's just a family thing so we've sort of come where we do eat between say 5:30 and 6:30, but I would say probably closer to 6 as our majority. And especially I think seasonally as well, like now that it's sunny outside and things, we'll often dinners maybe a tiny bit later because they're outside enjoying like the lights sort of thing until we come in, or we'll have dinner out there on the table, the patio outside.
I love it. Do you plan your menu in advance, what you're going to be eating for the week?
We have gone in and out of that. Like, I am just sometimes in the zone of like everything in my life so planned, and sometimes in the zone in one area is planned and everything is 100,000,000% unplanned. So I wish I could say I'm like an every single week meal planner. I've actually got a really great friend of mine, and we're like opposites, and maybe that's why we really work well together. And like sometimes I've sort of bumped into her having coffee like on her own, like for her own time, and I'm like, what are you doing? And she's like, oh, I'm meal planning for the whole week. And I'm like, that is so like such an awesome thing to do, that it actually refreshes you and you feel so on top of it. But it's also so interesting because it's fully mum lifing while you're having mum free time, like it's sort of like,
yeah.
And yeah, I love when I'm on it like that, but it's not common for us to have a full schedule sort of starting Sunday to roll out the whole week. We have a general idea, and we definitely have takeout. That's one thing that never changes. Thursday night's takeout night, and it always was when I was growing up, and my husband's, and it just is for our family. Like sometimes that means we order in chips, but we've got half the other stuff here, but they get in something, and they quite look forward to that. And it's just become a bit of a ritual because Thursdays are really busy as well. So
I love that. I feel the same about the menu stuff. Like when I'm on. Like, and it's so rewarding to like know what's for dinner tonight and not have to go and get like 10 ingredients that I've forgotten, or like, oh, we can't possibly have this because we have no sour cream left, or whatever it is. But then other weeks is like, wow, what are we going to do today? This is wild.
And that's why sometimes in this phase in particular, I find like there's certain things in the pantry that are lined up for a while, like, like coconut cream and like a few things that I just know I can like at least get some form of what that meal would usually look like if I've forgotten everything else, like, which is nice. And then there's the times we're making something that we really like that needs all the little like bits and pieces that make it really pop. Like that's one of those special occasions usually these days.
Full on, isn't it? Like just that you have to plan something every day of your life, like as a parent.
And then like the frustration of times where you do that and nobody seems to eat,
I went to all this effort. Such a thing, isn't it? Like the more effort you put in, I feel like the more you set yourself up for frustration or disappointment, because, actually trying to cook for other and please other people. I'm like the same with my kids and also my husband. Like he is an ex-chef. And so when I cook something and we're eating it, I'm looking at him like, what's the feedback? Like, and it better only be positive feedback. Like, where's my gold star here? Because, and if he doesn't like it, it's hard not to be resentful. Whereas you're better off cooking for yourself, right? Plan something that you want to eat.
It literally takes time. It really does. It takes so much time. And that's exactly right. And I think now, like, just that embracing that whole concept of, like the Thai green curry thing, that's like something I really have learned to started to enjoy, especially because I didn't grow up with it. And so I'm like, well, that's on the menu because, and it's funny how by being on the menu, I do think the game changer was that it's always offered deconstructed, like I said, though. I do think if I was trying to serve a bowl of fully prepared Thai green curry with all the bits, that it would be a completely different experience. So
yeah, my children definitely would not eat that, but they would eat the different parts of it.
Yeah.
It's interesting. What is one food that your kids will not eat despite you offering it regularly?
So this one I find interesting because I think it totally is that there's 3 different kids being in the same household and no matter what, like whether I've done anything perfectly right or perfectly wrong or whatever it is, like it's that some of their temperament comes into it significantly, temperament and development. So like our firstborn has never really been a fan of sauce. So any sort of sauce, not just sauce from, like I say, a tomato sauce bottle, but a saucy food. So everything's quite dry, like, and I would say she would used to like smash her like spaghetti bolognese like off the high chair, like right down her, like, as I remember it being a thing. We were like, oh my gosh, she loves it. She's like, lick it up off and that was up until maybe 16 months. And then literally until like maybe she was 8, never ever touched sauce again. Like it was just, and it would be offered. She would say things like you said, your daughter says, where she'd be like the smell. She would even like say, can you please move one seat down? She would say at school if someone was next to her and they had some like sort of saucy thing in like a container, especially if it's sat there and then it's open, she'd be like, oh, it's just so overwhelming, the smell. Like, so she's still being quite a compartmentalized, dry, like she'll go for thickened things like sour cream or yogurt, but it's just the thinness, I think.
Our firstborns are very similar, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting. And so, and like I said, the exposure's been there. It's not like we haven't, like had it on offer. And then our middle child, I would say there is actually not something I can think of that she hasn't tried or eaten. She is just so open to trying anything. Nothing's really put her off. Like she's gone through tiny little patches where the only thing, which is so bizarre for me because all my other children get bread if they don't eat anything else. Yeah. Like as in their safe food from a young age has always been like a little bit of something carby like that. Yeah. She just won't eat bread. Like she just doesn't, so if there's sausage in a bun or anything, she'll take always the bun away. So that's probably her only thing that she'll still eat it, but she would probably prefer not. Or if I say in the morning, like there's egg and toast, she won't have the toast. It's just her natural default. And to be honest, I actually do think we've lent towards investigating a bit of gluten intolerance. So it's funny, like her body knows that's not something that I like because of maybe what it feels like afterwards. Like I've never really put that together enough to go, oh, I think she's just really in tune with what feels good. So that's been interesting because it's only been really the patterns only started to emerge, which I've heard can happen a bit later. I don't know the specifics of it, but it's becoming harder and harder for her to have that and then feel comfortable. So I think there's something there. And then the toddler, I would say, is just in very, very strong toddler, like fussy phase, because I would actually say I don't know even if she eats at the moment. Like, that's what it feels like. Like, it feels like we're in a patch where I'm like, do you eat? Like, you get offered things, and then, or that real extreme experience of devouring something and then never touching it again for weeks, or never touching something and all of a sudden eating it when it's offered. So we keep offering the same things. Like, if the family's having Thai green curry, the same things are on offer. But yeah, I think, yeah, she just defaults to asking at the moment for macaroni cheese. Like, that's just the thing she's defaulting to. So it's tempting. It's tempting to serve a macaroni and cheese every single day for every single meal, because then I know she's getting something in her. But it's just trying to keep offering those things. Like, she's just gone back onto apple now, which is good, because I just felt like for a while there, the plate had the things, and not even a bite, I reckon. Sometimes it's hard.
It's a roller coaster, isn't it? We're deep. I feel like we hit this a bit later with Cleo. Now, in kind of heading into 3-year-old territory, it's kind of peaking more. I feel like we've got quite a
I would
restricted
say
one.
I hadn't really noticed it as much, and now it's in the 3-year-old phase. So it's an interesting. I remember these things, but when you're in them again, you're like, wow, this is actually quite challenging. Like, it is. The narratives that do come up for you are like, they do make you question, like, oh, like,
Is this the right way? Am I doing enough?
or is she, like, getting enough nutrients, or like,
Is she going to have scurvy? I don't know.
Yeah.
She won't. She's good.
Yeah,
it's
good.
interesting. It's such a roller coaster, though. And I think you're right. This idea that kind of those easy foods, it is really tempting to give that all the time. And I think you don't want to fall into a trap of doing that all the time. I think you want to use it strategically, right? That yes, you can reassure yourself that sometimes there's a full meal being eaten of those things, but actually your job isn't about, finding that one magical food and then offering it so often that, that child doesn't want that anymore because they've just had macaroni cheese too much. It's hard to trust the process in those times.
Trust. That's what I was going to say. It's the trust, because even like I said, like, there was a patch there where I would, like, say my husband has her Wednesday mornings, and then I have her Wednesday afternoons. So sometimes we just do that little trade over. Like, and he's like, well, she's basically been offered things and not eaten. Like, he sent me some photos recently, even of like, like, especially the breakfast. Like I said, we really like breakfast, so there'll be like scrambled eggs and maybe some raisin toast and maybe some yogurt. So there's like quite a bit of an offer, and they're just all lined up next to her, and nothing. Like, it's just been, and not a copious amount, but you can just see usually she would be given into one of 3,
Yeah.
and then I've had her for lunch and be like, well, she hasn't touched anything either. And then dinner's come around and she has, and I'm like, oh, like, and then like it'll be like 2 days later, she'll like be a little bit unwell, like snotty, and I'm like, it's almost like, and then after that, she'll just be like loading up again. And I was like, well, it's funny how that trust aspect of, like, she knew something was up, like she wasn't feeling up to it, like the appetite goes for, and that's just some of those things that sometimes in hindsight I go, she knew it was up, like, it's fine.
Such a great point. And I think that it's harder to see those all in context, isn't it? Or see them all together. It is easier to focus on the things that aren't going well. So you don't sometimes see the compensatory stuff, or you don't sometimes see that was because she was getting sick, or that was because she's in a slower growth period. And it is hard, especially if you have had a tricky eater, or she's been tricky for a while. It's hard not to see the positives too, like in that whole process.
It totally is. Yeah, it is. It's sometimes just having to put your eyes, like, flip the script a bit and look for the things that they are doing, and that's the same as like in the work I do. It's really easy to see the things that are going wrong. So it is hard to go, actually, let's really take another assessment of the day in a different perspective and actually see that, yeah, they're going to be okay. And that development driving it as well, like knowing in toddlerhood, if I didn't know that, and especially like that first time around when I didn't really have some of the understanding I have around toddler development now, I was much more stressed. So I think when you understand that there's development driving some of these things, it's like, okay, like, this is all good
Yeah.
to like soothe ourselves, you know?
Yeah. And I think knowing that normal thing, right? Knowing it's normal that when they're sick, they're not wanting to eat. And when they're going through these toddler phases, there can be days of almost nothing. I think there's been definite days where my kids have like licked the sour cream off something and that is literally all they've had, you know, for dinner. And that is part of childhood eating, really.
Or like ask for lots of water or something else, like which I think is interesting as well. So yeah,
It's wild, isn't it?
something in another form, you know?
Yeah, so good. All right, we're going to move on to the dessert. This is the final bit, and this is kind of where I want to talk to you more about the things that I guess we have in common, or the things that you've helped me with. And I'm interested to hear from you, but I've asked for your help many times over the years. And probably like the one thing that really stands out to me at a time when you gave me some advice that was quite a game changer. And I don't know if you remember, but it was we were having real struggles with my then 3-year-old about anything that needed her cooperation. And so that was like getting into the bath, getting out of the bath, getting into the car, wearing a hat, wearing sunscreen, packing away, you know, like anything that she had to be actively involved in was hard. And I had learned from you, I think, you know, like you and Janet Lansbury, my two parenting gurus, is that like I don't want to be repeating myself regularly. Like it's not my job to ask her 25 times to get into the bath. And also that I want to have kind of a predictable boundary, or like a predictable, you know, what's going to happen next. And that was really important. And particularly at a time I was either about to have a baby or just had a baby. So life was like really tricky for her, you know, had changed a lot. Do you remember this scenario? Yeah.
And it's a familiar one, like across the board as well.
Yes. And this is one of the things, like I did not feel alone in this. I was frustrated and like sick of it, but I wasn't thinking, you know, this is just me in this situation, because I think I'd heard enough from you that, you know, and I'm well aware I'm about to start this phase again with my second child. And I felt like we were falling into this habit of like trying to bribe her or trying to reward her. Like, if you don't get in the bath, you're not going to do this. And it really felt yuck. And I remember talking to you about it. Do you remember what you told me?
Yeah, I think I
Put you on
do.
the spot.
I think that's something I would probably still share, like to anyone going through a similar situation. Is I guess, like you said, you were aware this is what toddlers do. You were aware this is what 3-year-olds do. You were aware that with a change in their lives, they'll tend to push boundaries a little bit more and things like that. But what I think I remember reminding you of is like, is what that they're looking for in you when they're doing that as well. So like when they are pushing all those boundaries, they're not just doing to wind you up. Like they are usually seeking for a very clear boundary, but not one to be repeated, like you said, over and over again, but to be helped to progress towards it. But what comes up when we help them to progress towards it is usually some form of what feels like a power struggle, where it feels like you need to take charge or a version of control or bribing, because you're like, well, now it's just the strong pushback that's like smart, right? Because they're 3 as well. So it's different when they're like 1 and you're like, or 18 months and they're like, we don't want to. And you're like, I'm going to help you. And you pick them up and, you know, that sort of thing. But when you've got a 3-year-old, that can go really like that can go downhill pretty quick, right? So I think
they can thrash like nobody's business getting into the bath.
And then really like, are they having a bath when really like you're just having a bath because they're just kicking the water out and everything? And yeah. And I think we talked a little bit then about, there's probably 2 areas I would go down the path now, but back then we talked probably about this whole concept of like confident leadership or confident momentum as opposed to power struggle. And there is a difference. And the biggest difference is the confidence in the parent of knowing what you need right now from me is for me to help you with confidence, helping you to follow through, and that you're actually okay to fall apart and whatever it looks like. But when they feel confidence that I'm really sure of this boundary, it's such a different response from the child than when they feel us panicking or trying to like hope it all goes smooth. Yeah, or I think I almost said to you, well, what I would do is start to expect that her job right now is to push so hard against you, but she's really, really looking for that narrative in you that's, I would say to you, when I went through it, I would literally talk myself through the boundary before I did it. Like I'd be like, it is bath time. This is what it's going to look like. I'm going to say it once. Like I would talk myself through that before I even spoke to my child. And the second part to that is what they're looking for when they push the boundary is when we come in confidently, they can rest for starters. But the second thing is when they're at their worst and pushing at like their most is when they're needing us the most. So that whole concept of trying to connect through that as well. So confidence, where we say, well, it is time now, but then also trying to engage in some form of connection, whether it be like a challenge, like a 3-year-old loves like a challenge, like, or a, something a little bit less than will you walk or will I carry you, because they've gone beyond that by that stage, but something that seems a bit more like, I wonder, like, I don't know, who will get there first, or something that feels a little bit more, or I wonder if you'll be finished washing your armpits and giving some like saving face, I call it, before I even get there, like, so that it feels like they are in charge again, like they are, so it's just like, well, my mum and dad are confident, I can rest in that, and secondly, they're connecting with me, and I can get on board with that. And that's hard to do when it's the end of the day and all you want is for them to mother flippin' bath, like, and then go to bed, Like, I mean,
hard emphasis on the bed.
Was there anything else that I would have said?
No, that's exactly. And I think one of the confident assurance was the word that you used with me. And it was like, you're envisioning in your head it continuing on. You're not thinking, okay, what's my plan B? What's my plan C if these things don't work? And I feel like I've naturally embodied a lot more of that with my second child, is like, I know you don't want to, and this is what we're going to do. And I'm going to kind of like almost like create the whirlpool where you come along with me on this thing, and it's okay to push back, but we're still kind of going ahead.
And I do reckon it sounds so funny, but I cannot tell you, even from a mum's perspective, like with especially my firstborn, who was really strong-willed, like how common it is for us to firstly try and avoid any upset feelings or want them to just be compliant all the time. Like I think all of us would way prefer that, right?
Oh, so much easier.
But or try and be at their beck and call to keep the peace. So like I remember this one time, it's sort of similar, like when I first learned this whole concept of confidence assurance. Like we'd drive home and one day we drove past the fountain, and I think you talked about this in your stories recently about the one day you did something like and every day, and this is after school, she had started kindy, and it was after school where there's usually going to be the worst of them, the pushback, the reconnect to you, the need for a boundary to feel safe because they've been away from you all day, all the things that we also just wish we could go have like a little cuddle in the park. Like that would be a funner way of connecting, but no. And she just, like every single time we go in the car, the second fountain. And I think this fountain, we had picked something up. So it's like 40 minutes away or something in the complete opposite direction. Or even if it was 5 minutes out of the way, we're not doing that every day. Like, but I would try either avoid the conversation and talk about other things like, is the traffic light going to change? And I think we do all these things, thinking, but that's not really purposeful, like even engagement in play on that topic. It's just distraction. And there is a difference between like attachment play and purposefully leading in to connect with them and just distracting them. There is a definite difference as well. So I remember thinking, I've got to let her know that this fountain thing isn't going to be a daily situation. Like, so I want to be clear, I want to be confident, but I replayed in my head, no matter what the response would be. Would she kick the chair? Would she release all her feelings? Which she probably was asking to do every day when she asked for the fountain, and I kept trying to get us around peacefully. And I remember just how much of a game changer it was for me to first feel a real boost in my parenting, because I was like, oh, it can be hard and I can still feel in charge without being controlling, sort of thing. Yeah. I just said, I really know you love that fountain. You just wish we could see that fountain every day. Like it was really special for you. And I leant in and empathized and acknowledged where she was at. And then I said, and we're not going to be going past that fountain every day after school. And then the only reason, I think I'd said that before, I'd probably said it in a really explanatory way. The biggest difference was I wasn't rattled inside. I was really sure. I said, you can be, I actually say this often to my children, you can actually be as upset as you need to be, and it's okay. It's okay if you need to cry, which is so funny because as a parent, the opposite thing is it's okay, don't cry. You don't need to cry. And I can't believe how often I now say it's okay if you need to cry, it's okay if you need to be upset. And then I'll often, I can't let you kick the chair or whatever it is. And she did do like opposite of what I thought. She didn't have a big thrashing tantrum. She sort of just was like, thanks for finally telling me what I've, like, and she just settled right down. I don't think she ever asked for that fountain again. So it's just an interesting one because it feels like nothing really different happened. The narrative is where you're at, what they're getting from you, what clarity are they getting from you. That is what a child feels. So even when we sound really strict and underneath is not any form of confidence, they don't still, respond to that. They might just feel a little bit more nervous, scared, giggly, stress response, but they're not settled, and it is different. And I think that really helped so much with that confident parenting, I guess. And I mean, still, it's something I have to take myself away and do a little pep talk. Sometimes when I hit a new challenge that feels different or more, scary than the last, which does happen. I think, we never just perfect anything like that. It's just
never.
Learning our kids, learning ourselves, and all growing together.
I remember explaining it to my husband after I'd finished talking to you, and he's like, so we just kind of have to picture ourselves doing it. And I was like, yeah, like we've got this confident belief that that's what's going to happen as a result of what we're doing. And you just kind of feel it. And he was like, okay. But it definitely made a huge difference for us. And the other part that you had said to me at the time was she is checking whether you love her at her worst. When she's pushing against you, it's like, even at my worst, is everything okay? And so I think I had accidentally got into, I was setting a boundary, and I wasn't repeating myself, but I was getting cold in doing that. This is the rule. We're going to get in the bath, and kind of just not in a very fun way. And she's kind of pushing back to check, can you handle what I'm putting down? And I was kind of getting a bit, I wasn't firm with her, but it wasn't my natural, Cleo would say to me, are you cangry, mummy? If I did that, that real kind of.
Absolutely. And you can feel it, right? And our body language says so much. There's photos I've looked back on now when our second born came along and our toddler was doing the full blown, I'm having a million breakdowns about this new baby being born. And I thought I was being so calm, but I remember some of those moments and there's actually this photo where I'm grishing my teeth. So at the time, and I probably look like that 90% of the time while I was trying to navigate a baby and a toddler, because I'm no, yeah, mummy's here. But I'm raging inside.
Yeah. And it made such a difference. I remember texting you after the bath and being like it wasn't perfect. Everyone still cried at some point, but we were moving forward. It didn't feel like we were stuck in this stalemate of I'm telling you to get in, you're saying you're not going to, and we're just really stuck there. It made such a difference to me.
I think I've heard other people sort of compare it to I guess that whole concept of the CEO vibe or whatever. And I mean, look, I don't know. I've never really been under a legit CEO, and I sort of thought maybe that's that lack of warmth that you want someone to lead you, but you also don't want the lack of warmth. So you want to take charge of your team, but you also want to say, and that's a tricky one to be. It's sort of how do you, because they can feel both those things. They can either feel you're rattled or you are withdrawing because you're trying, and it's also okay. That's one of the things I would say, in sort of my field, or what I've done my PhD around, is about what they call reflective parenting, functioning. And what that really means in normal terms is ability as a parent to hold yourself, your needs, your desires, your things in mind, and simultaneously holding the desires, thoughts, and things that your toddler's trying to communicate or child's trying to communicate in mind. And that's a hard thing to do. But it doesn't have to then be perfect, because it's sort of based on a relationship where you have needs, they have needs, you have desires, they have desires. And you don't have to forfeit all of yours for them, and they don't have to forfeit all of theirs for you. And it is a daily thing. So I don't think it's ever meant to be perfect or sound perfect or be perfectly scripted. I think it's more understanding what's actually unfolding, and you're not trying to sort of extinguish behaviors or manage a child. You're trying to have a relationship where you learn how to communicate better, and you learn how to, I prefer that. I sort of feel well, then there's always room for growth. It's not we've come to a point where, I don't know, this kid's too far gone, or it sort of feels a little bit more hopeful every day.
I love that. And I remember you telling me, that some of those strategies, those real kind of control a child or like enforce kind of behavior can work to some extent in the younger years. Like if your child is scared of you, you know, the more you kind of trying to dominate, you can to some extent, but it's not till they get to like 7, 8 that like that doesn't work in the long term. Like, is that something you would still?
Well, for sure, because I guess like if you look at it, and if you do look at the research, like there's that sort of relationship, what we call sort of attachment, you know, psychological and developmental approach, which is really what all the research is pointing towards, you know, and then really we've cast ourselves back to the years and years before, where it's sort of more that behavior is sort of like we extinguish behaviors, we manage behaviors, we the way we extinguish them is through sources of like consequences or punishments or, you know, and like, have you ever heard that quote, like, why would anyone do better when they're like, you know, feeling terrible inside, or how can they do better if they feel worse? That sort of concept. And it's similar, like if you're a human who functions as a human, even if you're an adult and you've got all the capacities of your well, some of us or most of us are working to have all the capacities of our forebrain, like logic and reasoning and self-control and things like that, and somebody still threatens you to do better but you feel worse, it's never our best, is it? So yeah. And I think also if it's I've heard people talk about, you know, it's a relationship thing. So like if like somebody, like your hubby asks you to do something you really don't want to do, sometimes you're like, oh, I can't be flagged doing that, but because we're sort of in a partnership, in a relationship, that's something I sometimes will do to, you know, like the relationship is everything to the child, but the relationship is everything to us as well. And I think the relationship outlasts like strategies that work for certain ages. So, and also if you've got a stronger willed child, like really good luck, like really, really good luck, because the breakdown in the connection that you feel with each other and their need to push even harder because they feel more disconnected. Like I remember trying with our firstborn, like, you know, this is the timeout step, you sit here, you wait here, and all that happened was a whole new fight about the step. Like I was going from like, you know, we don't touch that, and now we have to sit here and wait. And then I'd be like, no, sit back down. And I'd be like, this does not feel like, not that it needs to feel good, but it felt like a waste of time. Do you know what I mean? It felt like a lot of energy. And all I had was this little person who was then giggling and like probably releasing stress responses and pushing further against me. And it would just spiral all day long. And it was until I started to go, oh, actually, we're on the same team. I can't let you draw on the wall. I'm going to help you stop. Would you like a sponge? Shall we clean it together? You know, or like, I'm right here with you. I'm going to help you move now. We're in this together. Like it just sort of feels also much more manageable, I think, or more productive, I'd say. And then definitely as they get older, I would say kids are smart, right? Like what happens if they're then afraid? They might start to hide or lie or pull away or tell you mistruths or whatever. And like that's one thing I have noticed. Like no way are we perfect parents, no way we've got these perfect angel children. But one thing we're always quite surprised about now that our kids are in sort of primary school is how honest and open they are with us, even when things go wrong or badly, or they know they've done something that wasn't, you know, straight away. Like we never have to hear from a teacher or another parent. We hear it directly from them. Yeah. And I think that's a lot of trust, you know, like being maintained, that they're not going to be completely, you know, torn to shreds sort of thing.
Yeah, that you are on their team.
Yeah, and that it's okay, like that, you know, yes, there's going to still be like knock-on effects to those things. We can't just, you know, we're not rescuing kids or anything, but they know that like we're going to work through that together, or we're going to own whatever's been going on together, you know. And that's the same as in toddlerhood. We're not excusing behavior, that we're leading them. We're, you know, I wouldn't call it punishment or consequences, but we are sometimes saying, I'm going to help you move now. I'm not going to let you continue to do that. Like we're doing what they'd probably call, you know, natural or logical follow throughs, I guess.
Yeah. And I like that, because I did also try like the threats or the consequences, like, well, you're not going to have this. And it doesn't work in the long, you know, it doesn't work in the short term, I would say. Like I couldn't come up with something that even meant anything to a toddler that then we didn't have a fight about when I took that thing away, or, it just didn't
Well, I think it's
feel.
also this whole like this real reminder that like toddlers, adults work top down brain where we've got logic, reasoning, we stop, think, act, come up with all these reasonable things that would unfold, and a toddler doesn't have that capacity. So when you're trying to do all these lessons, and this is one thing I remember speaking to you about years ago, is about the parent agenda. So in traditional sort of models of parenting, it's all about giving lessons and making sure you're teaching them right from wrong and morals and manners and all these things. And like really we're trying to do to a toddler's brain what they don't have the capacity for yet. They work from bottom up. So anything that they've say dysregulated, it's usually from their body. Like it's always coming reactive first, impulsive first, and then like they're borrowing out the top of our brain to help them. So really it's a lot more if they see it happening, if they watch it happening. They're learning much more by watching us say thank you so much, saying thank you on behalf of them. Like they are absorbing everything as it plays out, which is actually like terrifying when you start to see them becoming an older version, and you're like, oh, I really see a lot of me in there. Like
I resonate with that so much though, because I remember taking my eldest for a coffee at about this age, and I insisted that she say, not for a coffee, obviously she was having a baby tuna, but I insisted that she say thank you to the lady at the time, and she couldn't do it. And we sat at this coffee shop like for so long, not drinking this stupid baby chino, because I was like, no, I've said you'll say thank you, back before I really embodied this stuff. And it was just horrific. That was a standoff forever.
We've all been there. I think we've all been there. Like I also, in food related things, remember vividly, like she was only like 15 months or something, and there was only one thing left on her plate. Like, and this is the thing, I think that all of the stuff I've been doing in the research, this is why I've sort of like really linked up with you, because it's so like complementary. Because there I was trying to control the food situation. I was like, well, there was Smarties someone had given her for Easter or something, or a Easter egg or something, and I was like, well, we'll break off one of these chocolates, being really like rational, reasonable. This is totally reasonable. If she can eat the last thing, she can have. She did not budge, and then I felt like, oh, I just really wanted to give you this chocolate, like it's your first chocolate, like. And then I just remember throwing the thing in the bin, like really annoyed. Like, and I was like, what is wrong with me? Like, it's such a journey. And this is why I don't want any parent to ever feel like, oh, all these experts have perfected everything. Like, absolutely not. Like,
no way.
I'm on the go still. And I really like to identify with families, because I don't think it's ever also meant to look one way. Every single family is different. And I don't think everything, to one family, something might feel really inorganic. So then there's another version of that that's still healthy for the toddler's brain, still healthy for the parent's well-being, that we need to figure out,
Yeah. And the toddlers are so different, or children are so different. Right? I think about now, I've never insisted that my youngest say thank you. And she says thank you, like sometimes excessively, like when we're not even giving her things.
Like,
settle down now. So it's like, yeah, it's so interesting to see their different personalities, but also our different approaches and how much it doesn't become an issue. I think that's one of the things I've also learned is like, I don't have to teach her and tell her what to do. I can just kind of like meet with her and like she'll learn these things.
Don't you find as well, like, and this is what I find so interesting about like that the whole concept of birth order, and there are some studies around it, but I actually think like one of my core messages over the last few years, and even what my PhD really is about, like one of my main, like even my articles I've written is all about like basically do less, like observe more, grow as a person yourself and show respect yourself and things like that. And then do less teaching, do less over parenting, do less parent agenda of how they should be and how they should act and things like that. Not to say we're neglectful or permissive, but I do think there is something in that cycle that happens where like we can then free them, because I they often say, oh, the third born raises themselves, but like I would honestly say like our third, she's a toddler now, she's 3, of course she's been a 3-year-old, but I am so much less rattled. And it's not necessarily even just having the knowledge and stuff, it's just I don't know, it's just the focus of trying to get it all right and everything starts to really erode for you as well. And then sometimes just stepping back a bit, like breathing space, and it can just sort of like undo a few cycles that wouldn't have started. Like it's quite an interesting thing to consider.
I agree so much. And I think food is the same. Like the less that we don't have to talk about nutrition, we don't have to teach health messages. Like our kids are learning from what we do. They're learning, from how we eat as a family. You actually have to, do less. I think that's really.
And how cool is that? Like, but it's such a cool message because it's like, actually, guys, you're off the hook a bit more than you think. But as humans, it's hard to not be feeling like we've got all the ducks in the row and control and stuff. So it's actually a hard thing to do, even though it sounds really simple. It is quite hard to do. And that's where I think that reflection part is, and that's probably, I would say, my main sort of work that I do is really helping that bird's eye view part for parents so that they can come out of it. And I even speak to people for me, because I am just still in my own family, to just get those bird's eye view moments where you can, and I think that's what we've done together over the years, is having these conversations that then just brings you out a bit, and then actually some of the things start to settle without so much, like, I don't give you like tip 1, tip 2, tip 3, tip 4, like that feels too prescriptive for me. And you wouldn't ever have a family getting me give all the same exact jargon.
I remember discussing that with you over a margarita earlier in the year about having that bird's eye view, and us all being like, it's the best way to sort out your parenting dilemmas. My final question for you: what is for dinner tonight in your household? Have you done a menu for tonight, or are you flying by the seat of your pants?
That is such a good question, and I'm so glad you've asked it at this time of day, so I've still got time because I have no idea. We have nothing in the fridge. It's Friday, and Fridays are crazy. So like the girls have like a whole bunch of stuff right up until 6:30. So like a whole bunch of things that happen on Fridays, dance and recitals and a whole bunch of stuff at the moment. And so, I think I might send Kieran to do that. Might give him a job.
Good luck, Javi. Thank you so much for being my official first guest. Can you tell the people where they can find you?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks so much for having me. I love chatting to you. We could probably chat all day, so we'll have to do this again. But you can.
I was going to say, I had to wrap it up because we are like,
I know. And you'll have to like cut some things out. But you can find me. So I'm Mandy, and you can find me on Instagram at Raise Toddlers, and you can find me on my website, www.raisetoddlers.com.au. And my offerings, the best one of the lot is really our membership, quite similar to what Dr. Kyla offers, and just coming and asking all your toddler questions, development questions, understanding what development is driving the behaviors you're seeing, and just decoding a lot of toddler stuff, getting that bird's eye view. And I also do one-on-one consults, and we've got a team that does as well. So if you ever just want to get some light in a situation that feels a bit too, like you're not really sure where you're going with it, you can always book a consult as well. Absolutely get in touch. We'd love to support you guys.
You're the best, man. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Kai.
A huge thanks for tuning in and listening to my podcast. This is all brand new for me, so I'd love to hear your feedback. Give me a review or send me a DM. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And above all, I'd really love you to hit that subscribe button to keep listening. Thanks.